Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the thrilling journey with Tom and Kate. This couple, now in their 50s, seasoned and adventurous, has been traveling across America on their motorcycle, fearlessly confronting the unexplainable and the mysterious. After their eerie experiences in New Mexico, the dollmaker's house deep in the woods, and the haunted cinema in Detroit, Tom and Kate continue their path filled with surprises and dangers. In episode 4, we will follow them through some of their most bizarre encounters yet, starting with a cursed town where time stands still and meeting souls that refuse to move on. Get ready because this journey will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's begin. The giant dollhouse in the woods. After their harrowing experience at the haunted lighthouse, Tom and Kate decided it was time for a brief escape from the coast. The relentless winds and eerie cries of the sea still lingered in their minds, leaving them craving the serenity of the mountains. Vermont seemed like the perfect retreat, quiet, peaceful, and far from ghostly whispers of the past. They packed their camping gear and rode deep into the Green Mountains, seeking solitude among the towering pines. The crisp air and scent of fresh pine needles helped ease their nerves. For the first time in days, Tom felt a genuine sense of calm as he maneuvered the motorcycle down the winding forest road. Kate clung to him, her gaze occasionally drifting to the golden leaves fluttering in the breeze. "This was a good idea," Kate said, her voice light and hopeful. "We needed this break." Tom nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. No ghosts, no curses, just us and nature. Or so they thought. The sun was beginning to set when they reached a small clearing near a dirt road. As Tom set up the tent, Kate wandered toward the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the dense forest. Everything seemed untouched and tranquil, but there was something, a faint hum, almost like a lullaby, drifting on the wind. She tilted her head, trying to catch the melody more clearly, but it faded as quickly as it had come. "Kate," Tom called, "help me with the firewood." She turned back, shaking off the strange feeling. Just the wind playing tricks on her, she thought. Later that evening, as they sat by the campfire, a rustling noise caught their attention. An old man emerged from the shadows of the trees, his figure barely illuminated by the flickering flames. His face was weathered, with deep lines etched into his skin, and his eyes held a strange glint, not quite friendly, not quite hostile. "Evening, folks," the man greeted, his voice rough like gravel. "Didn't expect to see anyone camping this far north." Tom stood, his instincts on high alert. "We were just passing through. Thought it'd be a nice spot to spend the night." The old man chuckled, a hollow sound that sent a chill down Kate's spine. "Fair enough. Just be careful if you head north from here. There's a house deep in the woods, been abandoned for years. Folks around here call it the dollmaker's house." Kate's curiosity piqued. "Why's it called that?" The man's expression darkened. "Old tale. A man lived there long ago, made dolls. Hundreds of them. But after his daughter disappeared, he went mad, said he'd bring her back, no matter what it took. No one saw him again. But the house, it's still there. And sometimes, people say they hear laughter coming from inside. Laughter and crying. Creepy." Tom muttered, "Thanks for the warning." The old man tipped his hat and disappeared into the forest as silently as he had come. The next morning, despite the old man's ominous tale, Tom and Kate decided to explore the northern part of the forest. Curiosity had always been their weakness, and the thought of discovering an abandoned house filled with dolls was too intriguing to resist. The trail grew narrower and more overgrown as they ventured deeper into the woods. The towering trees blocked out much of the sunlight, casting long shadows across their path. After an hour of hiking, they finally saw it, a small, two-story house nestled among the trees. Its wooden exterior was weathered and gray, vines creeping up its walls like skeletal fingers. "Looks like no one's lived here for decades," Tom said, stepping closer. Kate took out her phone and snapped a few pictures. It's kind of beautiful in a creepy way. The front door creaked open at the slightest touch, revealing a dimly lit interior. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the floorboards groaned beneath their feet. The house smelled of age and neglect, but something else lingered beneath it, a faint, sweet scent, like old perfume. Then they saw them. Dolls. Hundreds of dolls lined the shelves and tables, their glass eyes glinting in the dim light. Some were small, no bigger than a child's hand, while others were nearly life-sized. Their faces were eerily lifelike, each one frozen in a different expression: joy, sorrow, fear. Kate shivered. This is unsettling. No kidding. Tom agreed. Let's look around quickly and get out of here. They moved cautiously through the house, each room revealing more dolls. In one room, they found a rocking chair that swayed gently as if recently occupied. In another, a music box played a haunting melody on its own. Kate paused in front of a large portrait hanging on the wall. It depicted a man with a gaunt face and piercing eyes, standing beside a young girl holding a doll. Beneath the portrait was a plaque that read, "For my beloved Clara. May you always be with me." "Tom," Kate called, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think this is the doll maker." Tom joined her, his eyes narrowing as he studied the portrait. "He doesn't look particularly friendly." Suddenly, a soft giggle echoed through the house. Tom and Kate froze, their eyes darting around the room. "Tell me you heard that," Kate whispered. "Yeah," Tom replied, his voice tense. "Time to go." But as they turned to leave, the front door slammed shut on its own. The front door slammed shut with a force that echoed through the entire house, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Tom and Kate froze, their eyes locked on each other in growing panic. "That wasn't the wind," Tom muttered, gripping Kate's arm protectively. "No kidding," she whispered. "We need to find another way out." They turned back toward the hallway, but the house seemed different, almost as if it had shifted around them. What had once been a short corridor now stretched far into the darkness, with doors on either side that hadn't been there before. The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural presence. "We're not alone," Kate said, her voice barely audible. A soft creak echoed from one of the side rooms. Slowly, they approached, peering into what appeared to be a nursery. It was filled with cribs and tiny rocking chairs. But it was the dolls that commanded their attention. They were everywhere, on shelves, in cribs, even seated at a miniature tea party set up in the middle of the room. One of the dolls, a life-sized figure dressed in a faded pink dress, sat at the head of the table. Its glass eyes seemed to follow them as they moved. "It's like they're watching us," Kate said, shivering. "Let's not stick around to find out," Tom said, taking a step back. "We'll find a window and..." Before he could finish, the doll at the head of the table turned its head. Slowly, deliberately, Kate gasped, stumbling back into Tom. "Did you see that?" "Yeah," Tom said, his voice trembling. "We're getting out of here now." They retraced their steps, but every turn led them deeper into the maze-like house. Doors appeared where none had been before. Familiar rooms vanished without a trace. It was as if the house itself was alive, toying with them. In their frantic search for an escape, they stumbled upon a workshop at the back of the house. Wooden benches lined the walls, covered with tools and half-finished dolls. The air was thick with the scent of varnish and sawdust. In the center of the room stood a large doll, taller than any they had seen before. It was nearly 6 feet high, with glass eyes and intricately detailed features that made it look disturbingly lifelike. "Tom," Kate said, pointing at the doll, "look at its face." He stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The face was identical to the young girl in the portrait they had seen earlier, Clara. "This can't be a coincidence," Tom muttered. "It's her. The doll maker must have turned her into a doll?" Kate finished, her voice trembling. That's insane. Maybe, but given everything we've seen, I'm not ruling anything out. Suddenly, the lights in the workshop flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound, small footsteps, shuffling closer and closer. A faint giggle echoed through the darkness, sending a jolt of fear down their spines. Tom fumbled for his flashlight and switched it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing dozens of dolls standing in the doorway, their glass eyes glinting in the dim light. "They're moving," Kate whispered, her voice shaking. "Keep moving," Tom said, gripping her hand tightly. "We can't let them corner us." They pushed their way through the workshop, the dolls closing in around them. One reached out, its tiny hand grazing Kate's arm. She yanked away with a cry, her heart pounding in her chest. They burst into the main hall, gasping for breath, but their relief was short-lived. Standing at the top of the staircase was the figure from the portrait, the dollmaker himself. His eyes burned with a malevolent light, and his face twisted into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "This is my sanctuary. My children live here, forever." "We're leaving," Tom said, stepping in front of Kate. "You're not stopping us." The dollmaker raised a hand, and the dolls began to close in once more. But Kate noticed something, a large, ornate music box on a pedestal nearby. The same haunting melody they had heard earlier was emanating from it. "Tom, the music box," she shouted. "It's controlling them." Tom didn't hesitate. He rushed toward the music box, dodging the advancing dolls, grabbing it with both hands. He smashed it against the floor. The music stopped abruptly, and the dolls froze in place. The dollmaker let out a guttural scream, his body dissolving into shadows that evaporated into thin air. The house began to shake, the walls cracking and splintering as if it were collapsing in on itself. Tom and Kate sprinted toward the front door, which now stood wide open, beckoning them to escape. They barely made it outside before the entire house imploded, leaving nothing but a pile of rubble and broken dolls. Breathing heavily, Tom turned to Kate. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "Let's never do that again." Tom chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Agreed." As they walked back toward their campsite, neither of them noticed the small doll lying in the grass, a doll with dark, glassy eyes and a faint, knowing smile. A forgotten cinema. Tom and Kate drove away from the remains of the dollmaker's house with a mix of relief and lingering unease. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the forest as they headed back to the main road. The eerie experiences of the past night had left them drained, but curiosity was always their weakness, a weakness that often led them into strange and dangerous places. "How about something urban for a change?" Kate suggested as they rolled into a small diner on the outskirts of the city. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Urban? You mean creepy buildings with broken windows and rusted metal staircases?" Kate smirked. "Exactly. I heard Detroit has some of the most fascinating abandoned places. What do you think?" Tom sipped his coffee, considering it. "Why not? We haven't been to Detroit in a while. Could be interesting." With that decision made, they hit the road, heading toward the once thriving Motor City, a place known for its history, resilience, and an abundance of abandoned buildings that whispered secrets of the past. The streets of Detroit were a mix of old and new, with modern skyscrapers standing beside crumbling relics of the city's industrial past. Tom and Kate parked their motorcycle in front of an old warehouse and took a moment to absorb the atmosphere. The air was thick with history, and every street corner seemed to hold a story waiting to be told. They spent the first few hours exploring an old train station and a forgotten hotel, taking photos and exchanging stories about the city's past. But it wasn't until late afternoon that they stumbled upon something truly intriguing. A man in his 60s, with a worn cap and a cigarette dangling from his lips, was sitting on the steps of an old theater. The marquee above him read, "Elysian Theater, closed since 1974. "You two look like the adventurous type," the man said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "You ever hear about this place?" Tom glanced at the building, its Art Deco facade still holding a trace of its former grandeur despite the grime and decay. "No, but it looks interesting. What's the story?" The man chuckled darkly. "This ain't just any old theater. The Elysian has a reputation. Back in the day, they said every movie shown here predicted a death. And the last film it played, let's just say the couple who starred in it never made it out alive. No one's set foot in there since." Kate crossed her arms. "Sounds like an urban legend." "Maybe," the man said, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "But I'd think twice before going in there." Tom and Kate exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that said, "We're definitely going in." The front doors of the Elysian creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty lobby. Dust hung in the air, and the faint scent of mildew filled their nostrils. A grand staircase led up to a balcony, and faded red velvet curtains framed the entrance to the main auditorium. "Wow," Kate whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "It's like stepping back in time." Tom swept his flashlight across the lobby, revealing old movie posters and Art Deco details that hinted at the theater's former glory. The tiles beneath their feet were cracked, and cobwebs clung to the chandelier overhead. They ventured deeper into the theater, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The main auditorium was vast, with rows of crumbling seats stretching toward the screen. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling. "Feels like we're being watched," Tom said, scanning the dark corners of the room. Kate nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Let's take a look at the projection room. Maybe we can find something interesting." The stairs to the projection room were steep and narrow, each step creaking ominously under their weight. The door at the top hung ajar, revealing a small, cluttered room filled with dusty reels of film and old equipment. Tom picked up one of the reels, wiping the dust off the label. "The Last Performance," he read aloud. "Creepy title," Kate said, peering over his shoulder. They set up the projector, curiosity getting the better of them. The machine whirred to life, and the screen in the auditorium below flickered as the film began to play. At first, it seemed like a typical old black and white film, a couple walking hand in hand through the streets of Detroit. But then something caught their attention. "Wait," Kate said, leaning closer. "That's us." Tom's jaw tightened. No way. But it was unmistakable. The couple on the screen looked exactly like them, wearing the same clothes they had on now, walking down the same street they had just explored earlier that day. "How is this possible?" Kate whispered, her voice trembling. The film continued, showing scenes from their exploration of the theater, moments that had happened only minutes ago. And then it moved beyond the present, showing things that hadn't happened yet. Scenes of terror, scenes of death. Tom and Kate stared at the screen, their hearts pounding. The film continued, showing flashes of their future, or what seemed to be their future. It depicted them running through the dark corridors of the theater, pursued by shadowy figures that looked eerily like themselves. "We need to stop this," Tom said, his voice tight with urgency. He reached for the projector, but the machine kept running, the reel spinning faster than it should. The film sped forward, revealing even more disturbing scenes. "Look at that," Kate pointed. The image on the screen showed them lying motionless on the floor of the projection room. "Turn it off," Kate shouted. Tom grabbed the projector's power switch, but it refused to turn off. Sparks flew from the machine as it whirred louder. the images on the screen growing more chaotic and violent. Then, with a loud pop, the film reel snapped, and the screen went dark. The silence that followed was deafening. Tom and Kate exchanged a glance, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "We should go," Tom said, taking Kate's hand, but before they could move, the screen flickered back to life. This time, the image wasn't a film. It was a live feed of the projection room, but not from the present. The version of themselves they had just seen on the screen moments ago was now standing behind them in the flesh. "Run," Tom shouted, pulling Kate toward the stairs. Their doppelgangers followed, their footsteps echoing in perfect unison. Every movement was identical, every expression a distorted reflection of their own fear and desperation. Tom and Kate bolted down the narrow staircase, their shadows stretching long and distorted under the flickering lights. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, closing the distance with unnatural speed. In here, Kate yanked Tom into a side room, slamming the door shut behind them. They pressed their backs against the door, holding their breath as the footsteps stopped just outside. The air in the room was stifling, filled with the scent of old film and mildew. Tom scanned the room, his eyes falling on a pile of film reels stacked in the corner. "We have to destroy the projector," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the only way to stop this." Kate nodded. "But how do we get back there without being caught?" Tom peeked through a crack in the door. The hallway was empty. "We go now. Stay close." They moved quickly and quietly through the darkened corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The theater seemed to shift around them, the walls narrowing and stretching as if alive. The projector room was just ahead, its door hanging open. Tom stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking onto the projector. It was glowing with an unnatural light, the reels spinning on their own. "I'll distract them," Kate said, picking up a piece of broken wood from the floor. "You destroy the projector. Be careful," Tom said. Kate nodded and slipped back into the hallway, her footsteps fading into the distance. Tom approached the projector, his hands trembling. He grabbed a metal rod and brought it down hard on the machine. Sparks flew as the projector shuddered and emitted a high-pitched whine. Suddenly, the room filled with light. The doppelgangers reappeared, their faces twisted with anger. "Tom, hurry!" Kate's voice echoed from the hallway. Tom swung the rod again, smashing the projector's lens. The light grew blinding, and the doppelgangers let out an inhuman scream before dissolving into shadows. The theater began to shake, the walls cracking and splintering as if the building itself was collapsing. Tom and Kate sprinted toward the exit, dodging falling debris and bursts of light. They burst through the front doors just as the entire building imploded behind them, leaving nothing but a pile of rubble and dust. Tom bent over, gasping for breath. That was too close. Kate wiped her forehead, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like that before." They stood in silence for a moment, staring at the ruins of the theater. The air was heavy with dust, and the street was eerily quiet. "Let's get out of here," Tom finally said, taking Kate's hand. As they walked away, a faint flicker of light appeared in the rubble. The projector's lens glowed one last time, and a distorted laugh echoed through the empty streets. The town frozen in time. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon as Tom and Kate left Detroit behind, the eerie glow of the Elysian Theater still fresh in their minds. Their motorcycle roared down the empty highway, cutting through the cool morning air. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the mountains, promising solitude and perhaps, for once, peace. "Colorado sounds nice," Tom said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Fresh air, snow-covered peaks, no haunted theaters." Kate chuckled softly. "Yeah, but knowing us, we'll probably stumble into something weird anyway." The wind picked up as they climbed higher into the mountains. Snowflakes began to fall, gently at first, then harder as the sky darkened. The temperature dropped sharply, and soon the landscape around them was a blur of white. "We need to find shelter," Tom said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Kate pointed ahead. There, a sign. The faded wooden sign read, "Welcome to Everlake." The town appeared as if out of nowhere, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pine trees. It was small but charming, with rows of tidy houses and a main street lined with quaint shops. Snow covered the rooftops and blanketed the streets, giving the entire place a postcard-perfect look. Tom and Kate slowed as they rolled into town. Something about Everlake felt off. It wasn't just the stillness or the way the snow seemed untouched. Despite the town appearing well populated, it was the sense of being watched, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. They parked the motorcycle outside a diner. The sign above the door read, "Everlake Diner, open since 1952. The windows glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the cold outside. "Warm food sounds good right now," Kate said, rubbing her hands together. Inside, the diner was a perfect time capsule. Checkerboard floors, red vinyl booths, and a jukebox playing soft jazz. A group of locals sat at the counter, sipping coffee and chatting quietly. "Afternoon, folks," the waitress greeted them with a bright smile. She wore a classic 1950s style uniform, complete with a starched apron and perfectly curled hair. "What can I get you?" "2 coffees and whatever hot food you have," Tom said, sliding into a booth. Kate glanced around. "It's cozy, almost too perfect." The waitress returned with steaming mugs of coffee and 2 plates of meatloaf. Tom took a bite and nodded appreciatively. "Not bad. Are you two passing through?" the waitress asked, her smile unwavering. "Yeah," Tom said, "got caught in the snowstorm. Figured we'd wait it out." The waitress's eyes flickered with something Tom couldn't quite place, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you like. We don't get many visitors in Everlake." After finishing their meal, Tom and Kate decided to explore the town. The streets were eerily empty, despite the cozy lights glowing in the windows of every house. They passed a barber shop, a grocery store, and a movie theater, all seemingly frozen in time. "Look at this," Kate said, pointing to a newspaper in a vending box. The headline read, "Everlake prepares for annual winter festival, December 1953. Tom frowned. "That's strange." "No kidding." They walked further down the street, their footsteps crunching in the snow. The clock on the town hall tower caught Tom's attention. It read 5:45. "I swear it's been 5:45 since we got here," he said. Kate checked her watch. Mine stopped too. The sun began to dip below the mountains, casting long shadows across the town. The air grew colder, the wind whispering through the streets. "We should find a place to stay," Tom said. "Something tells me we don't want to be outside after dark." They found an inn at the edge of town. It was quaint, with lace curtains in the windows and a hand-painted sign that read, "Everlake Inn, Est, 1950. The innkeeper, a kindly woman in her 70s, showed them to their room. "You two are lucky to have found us before nightfall," she said. "The nights can get strange around here." Kate raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" The innkeeper hesitated. "Oh, just the cold. It gets terribly cold at night." The room was simple but comfortable, with a large bed and a view of the town square. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. "There's definitely something weird going on here," he said. "We'll take a look around in the morning." Kate nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. The wind outside sounded almost like voices, whispering secrets they couldn't quite understand. Night had fully fallen over Everlake, casting the town in an otherworldly glow. The wind howled around the inn, rattling the windows and filling the room with an eerie chorus of whispers. Tom and Kate sat on the bed, wide awake despite their exhaustion. "I don't like this place," Kate whispered, glancing at the window. "Something feels trapped, like it's waiting." Tom nodded grimly. "We'll get some answers tomorrow. Let's try to sleep." But sleep never came. The first signs of danger. At precisely midnight, a loud, mechanical chime echoed through the town, followed by the sound of creaking wood and shuffling footsteps outside. Tom shot up from the bed and rushed to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. People were gathering in the town square, their faces eerily calm despite the frigid wind whipping around them. Their eyes stared blankly ahead, and their movements were stiff, almost robotic. The clock tower chimed again, and each of them turned in perfect unison toward the center of the square. "Tom, what is that?" Kate asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he said, grabbing his coat, "but we're about to find out." They slipped out of the inn and moved cautiously toward the square. Keeping to the shadows, the crowd remained frozen in place, surrounding a massive clock standing on a pedestal in the center of the square. Its ornate face glowed with a pale blue light, and its hands were locked at 6 o'clock. "It's the clock," Tom whispered. "That's what's holding this place in time." "But how?" Kate asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "And why?" Before Tom could answer, the crowd suddenly turned toward them, their eyes glowing with the same eerie blue light as the clock. "Run!" Tom shouted, grabbing Kate's hand. They sprinted down the nearest alley, the sound of footsteps growing louder behind them. The townspeople moved with unnatural speed, their footsteps echoing like a drumbeat in the empty streets. "We need to destroy the clock," Tom yelled. "It's the only way to break whatever's holding them here." They burst back into the square, the mob closing in around them. Tom grabbed a nearby metal rod and swung it at the clock's base. The sound of shattering glass cutting through the chaos. The clock's face cracked, and the blue light flickered. The townspeople froze in place, their glowing eyes dimming. "Keep going," Kate shouted, picking up a large rock and slamming it into the pedestal. The clock let out a deafening whine, the hand spinning wildly before exploding in a burst of light. The townspeople collapsed to the ground, their bodies lifeless and still. Tom shielded his eyes from the light, his heart racing. "Did we do it?" Kate looked around, her breath catching in her throat. The town was dissolving around them, buildings crumbling into dust and fading into the swirling snow. "We need to get out of here," she yelled. They ran back toward their motorcycle, dodging falling debris as the world around them disintegrated. The streets disappeared beneath their feet, replaced by an endless expanse of snow and ice. Finally, they reached the edge of town. Tom started the motorcycle, and they sped away just as the last remnants of Everlake vanished behind them. They stopped several miles down the road, breathless and shivering. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky bright with stars. "That was something else," Tom said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Kate stared back toward the empty horizon. "Do you think there are more places like that out there?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He tightened his grip on the handlebars and glanced at her, his eyes serious. "If there are, we'll find them." They rode off into the night, the cold wind biting at their faces but the promise of new adventures keeping them warm. Behind them, the snow-covered valley lay quiet and empty, with no trace that Everlake had ever existed. As the first light of dawn broke over the snow-covered valley, Tom and Kate rode away, leaving behind the haunting memory of Everlake. The question lingered in their minds: how many more towns like Everlake exist across the country? How many stories remain buried in time, waiting for someone to uncover them? Every place they've visited has left an indelible mark, but perhaps the most valuable lesson they've learned is that things are never as they seem. And not every story ends with a full stop. The journey ahead is still long, and Tom and Kate know there are more mysteries awaiting them. Be prepared, because the next episode will take us to even darker and more chilling places. We'll see you again soon. Until then, stay brave and stay curious.